Nigel Farage is on with us. He's the former head of UKIP and a contributor to Breitbart News many times over the years, and he is the Mr. Brexit, as the president calls him. So, Nigel, let's set up where we are. We got into some great detail with Oliver Lane at the start of the show. Thanks for joining us, by the way, on Breitbart News Daily.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's great to speak to you again. And let's start at the top. Talk to us about what is this deal that Theresa May has put forward, and why did it come about?
Well, I mean, the referendum that we had on our continued membership of the European Union was as it turned out, seismic event in British politics. We don't tend to use referendums very often. It's quite difficult for us to get the equivalent of ballot measures for almost anything. But we had this referendum. The world, of course, was utterly certain that we'd vote to remain in the European Union, and lo and behold, how dare the British people exercise their voice like this? We voted to leave. And leaving, of course, meant getting back our sovereignty and all the subsets of that, like control of our fishing waters, immigration controls, because we had free movement with the rest of Europe. And here we are now, 2.5 years on, after a protracted negotiation led by a prime minister who actually voted Remain, which seems pretty bizarre to many people. But in reality, our civil servants, our public servants negotiating. And what this deal does is it does take us out of the European Union. Namely, we leave the treaties that we've signed up that makes us an EU member at 11 p.m. on March the 29th next year. So I should, Alex, be saying to you that it's time to get the corks out of the champagne bottles. It's a huge celebration after 25 years of me fighting for us to be an independent country. I'm afraid there's a very big but, which is that although we're leaving, she signed us up to a new series of arrangements, which mean we're going to be giving away up to 60 billion sterling to stay trapped inside the European Union's customs union, and that means that effectively they make all the laws for our businesses, our industries. But because we've left, we have no more European commissioners and no more MEPs, so we'll have to take laws without any say, which really is taxation without representation. But worst of all, there is a complex little legal niggle in there called the backstop, which effectively means that we won't be able to leave that customs union and take back full control at any point in the future unless the European Union agrees to it. So it's rather like saying, look, I'm voluntarily going to come into prison for a period of time. When I want to leave, you will let me out, won't you? I mean, it's complete madness, and I've branded this as the worst deal in history. So the problem is we're faced with Brexit in name only. We're leaving the treaties, but effectively we're not getting back control of our money, our laws, or our borders. So as you can imagine, there is considerable anger brewing in the country. She now is going to put this, the Prime Minister, Mrs. May, to the House of Commons for a vote, and we expect that to come between 10th, 12th of December, that kind of time frame. Now, who knows exactly what tactics she'll use, but I'm sure that every blackmail trick known to man is going to be used to try to get MPs to vote for the deal. She may even, if she feels desperate, go as far as to say, if you don't vote for this deal, we'll force you to have a second referendum. It could go as far as that. So we enter into a fortnight now of political lobbying, where she tries to get her deal through. But those of us that believe the Believe cause say in many ways this deal is actually worse than our current form of membership.
Wow. And one thing that I was noticing is that it seems like the two key bargaining chips that you have on the UK side of things is the access to the UK, the British markets, and just the paying into the sort of taxation, the fees or the dues, whatever it would be, to pay into the EU. And it sounds like you're not really leveraging that very much here in this deal, Nigel.
No, we're not leveraging it at all. And in fact, we've ceded further sovereignty over Northern Ireland, further sovereignty over Gibraltar. And of course, anyone that was a businessman or a businesswoman would say, well, hey, let's have a think about this. We are a massive marketplace for European goods. They're selling us about 100 billion a year more than we're selling them. And for that, we're paying in a net 10 to 15 billion sterling every year. In a sense, we had all the cards because French and German industry desperately needs the British market. But at no point have they thought like business people. A business person goes into a negotiation and the other side knows that at any point they could get up and walk out of the room and the deal is dead. And we never, ever, ever had that threat. And perhaps in a slightly more sinister way, there was a comment 2 weeks ago from Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, and she said, Mrs. May wants to stay part of Europe. Well, what a very telling comment that was, because apart from leaving the treaty, apart from leaving in name, we're staying part of all the EU agencies, we're staying part of the EU law structure, and there are some in this country beginning to think that this, in fact, was a willful, deliberate betrayal by Mrs. May from the very start. She's broken every promise she made when she became leader. She's broken every promise she made in the general election. And there is a feeling that the establishment, the globalists, call them what you will, are trying to get their own back.
Yeah, and this is how I'm kind of cynical on this from this vantage point, Nigel, but it does seem to me that this has always sort of been the intention, which is maybe if you just run out the clock, sap the willpower of the Brexiteers, and then maybe you can get away with something that's basically identical to the previous deal, as close to the previous deal as possible, and just kind of try to beat down people's willpower. And that's one thing that Theresa May seems to be relatively expert about, is that she wins wars of attrition. She's been likened to like a cockroach or a Terminator or something like that. And I'm not trying to be overly negative, but that's just sort of what it evokes, because she's somehow weathered so many of these storms. It's almost shocking.
Yes, and I mean, the one thing she's banking on now above everything is that there's a substantial proportion of the population sick to death of even hearing the word Brexit.
Yes.
and saying just get on with it. Well, that's fine. I would echo just get on with it. It's just that, Alex, I would get on with it rather differently to the way that Theresa May is.
Okay, so I have to ask in particular about the globalist gloating. Emmanuel Macron seems super excited about this, even though he's losing his grip in his own country. He seems to be very excited about what's happening in yours, Nigel.
Yes, he was, and he made a big threat yesterday. He said, well, of course, at the end of this next period, and that could be up to the end of 2020, 2021, if France doesn't continue to have access to Britain's fishing waters, which means if France can't catch most of the British fish that swim in our waters, he would trigger this backstop mechanism to make sure that we were permanently trapped inside EU laws. So, even before the ink is dry on the document, we've got a French president threatening us. And that tells me all I need to know. It's a rotten deal. It's the worst deal in history. I really hope Parliament rejects this.
Nigel, we have about a minute together. Could you give us some more context on why this matters so much to the United States? Because if you see the hostility from the EU as a whole to the United States, Britain and the United States, of course, traditionally an incredible partnership. I think this is a huge erosion of that, but give it to me in your words.
Well, we share between our two countries not just a language, but we also share a massive degree of intelligence sharing. We are the primary movers and shakers in NATO and have been for over 70 years. And we have a great deal of investment. We are the biggest investors in America, and you're the biggest investors here. And the opportunity of Brexit was for us to get out of EU rules and to be able to do a broad-ranging trade deal with the United States of America. It would have brought our countries closer together. It would have made our countries more prosperous. It's a good idea from every perspective. But now, with what Mrs. May signed up to, there is no conceivable way we can do that for many, many years to come, and I'm sad about that.
Nigel, does the deal die, or does it somehow survive?
Well, looking into my crystal ball, I still believe this deal will fail, and I've no doubt that will see some drama of her going back to Brussels and trying to get more concessions. I still think this deal fails, and then we go into the really high-risk area. Legally, we would then just leave the European Union under the treaties, under our legislation on March 29th next year, which would be great, without being tied. But it is at that moment when our career politicians will step in and try to amend that legislation and force, believe it or not, a second referendum upon us.
Well,
we are going to go into 6 or 8 weeks of high drama.
I got to run, Nigel, but the only good news about that is it's a fascinating story that we'll get to track from a news perspective, but my heart breaks for you in many ways. We got to run to a break. Thank you, sir. Nigel Farage, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alex Marlowe. We'll be right back.